Hello and welcome to this session. My name's Hugh Morgan. I'm a general practitioner and GP educator from Britain, though I've worked in many countries of the world as a consultant in medical education. So in this session, we're looking at the characteristics of Jesus as a teacher. And whilst many of us may be familiar with the things that Jesus taught, we haven't necessarily perhaps paid much attention to the way in which he taught. So that's what we're focusing on in this session, the teaching methods that Jesus used. So since you undoubtedly will have some familiarity with these, I'd like to begin by inviting you to be in pairs, in twos, just talk to the person next to you and list if you can, as many of the methods that Jesus used as a teacher as you can. So the teaching methods that Jesus used, see if you can make a list. And I'll give you 5 minutes to do that, and then we'll have some feedback. So let's consider then, what are Jesus' teaching methods? Well, one which everybody comes up with is that he told stories. As we look through the Gospels, we see that he based a lot of his teaching around stories that he was telling people. And that immediately resonates with us as medics because we are surrounded and confronted every day with patient stories. So we can use the patient story as a basis for teaching. And that's a very important point. Then he related to things that the people were familiar with, the things that surrounded them. Birds of the air, fish of the sea, flowers of the field. He made links between the things that the people knew about and the message that he wanted to get across. And that's another important point. And then we see that a lot of his teaching came from questions that people came to him with. They were asking him questions. Things that he'd said or did might have stimulated some question in their mind. So they'd ask him something. He would then conduct a teaching session based on the question. So encouraging and answering questions is a key part of good teaching. He wasn't afraid to challenge people, and that again is necessary in teaching, to challenge beliefs, to challenge what people think is fact, to challenge attitudes, maybe. And as part of that, there's a need sometimes to question the assumptions that people have. People often come with things they assume to be true or background worldviews which they've never really looked at. And maybe part of teaching is to raise questions about that and to help people to consider things from a different perspective. And then Jesus clearly had authority. He knew what he was talking about. The way in which he taught, his manner, his character was one that had authority, and people recognized there was a difference here in the way he taught compared to some of the teachers that they were familiar with. So it's important for us as teachers that we know our material, we know the content of that which we're teaching, and it's clear from our manner that we have a grasp of it and can convey it in a way which comes across clearly. Authority in teaching is important. But even more importantly, Jesus modeled the things that he taught. So it wasn't a question of him just saying things. His life actually demonstrated the reality of the things he was teaching. So the behaviors and attitudes that he was saying are good and are right. He demonstrated them consistently in his life. There was no mismatch between the content of what he taught and the things that he did. And that's also important for us as teachers. It must be clear to our students, our trainees, that which we're saying, we are also doing, and we're demonstrating the reality of the things that we teach. And then finally, he emphasized that learning took place from life, from the real events that were going on around him. And that's important in medicine too. We want to learn from the reality of our patients' experiences. And it continues for life. It isn't something that ends. We never get to a point where we say, I now know everything. We never stop learning. That's something that Jesus made clear, and that's important for us too. So what we're going to do now is look at one particular example of some well-known teaching of Jesus, the parable of the Good Samaritan, which we find in Luke chapter 10. And we're going to analyse this not for the moral lesson that it contains, which you may very well be familiar with and I'm sure have probably done before, but we're going to look at the teaching methodology that Jesus uses as he goes through that parable. So I'd like you now to form groups of 4 or 5, slightly larger than just 2, and read through this parable together. It'll appear on one side of the screen, and then answer the questions that are asked about it that will appear on the other side of the screen. So here we have the parable on one side and the questions on the other. So in your groups of 4 or 5, read through the parable and then answer the questions. Somebody make notes, write down your conclusions, and then we'll discuss them together. And I'll give you 15 or 20 minutes to work through that. So if you'd like to begin that now, that's good. Okay, so let's work through these questions together and see what you've come up with. So the first question is, what prompts Jesus to begin the teaching session? In verse 25. And as I'm sure you all quickly gathered, what he's doing is responding to a question from a learner. Now, in fact, this is a trick question. The Pharisee is trying to catch him out. But that need not concern us here. The fact is it's a question, and Jesus uses the question as an opportunity to teach. But we need to note carefully, what is the first thing he does in response to the Pharisee's question? And what he does is feed it back to the questioner to get an understanding of the questioner's current level of knowledge and understanding. And that's very important. When people ask questions, we need to know where they're coming from and what they currently understand. So rather than rushing in with the answer, we want to explore a bit. Where's the question coming from? What do you currently think you know and understand about that issue? Very important teaching technique which Jesus uses there. Then what is the next thing he does in the following verse? He affirms what's correct in the response that's given. That's also important. When we're teaching, we want to affirm the things that our students already know correctly, because that's encouraging for them and helps build a good relationship between us. So he is able to affirm some of what the Pharisee has said. And we should always do that where we can. And then how does he respond in the next few verses to the next question from the teacher of the law? And here we see again something that's very important and relevant for us as medical teachers, because basically he sets a problem-based case study. He tells them a story that would have been something that resonated with them because these kind of things happened. That road from Jerusalem to Jericho was notorious for robbers who would attack people. So it could very well have been a true story. And medicine, as we said earlier, is full of stories. We can use the stories to teach. So what Jesus does here is tell the story and then get them to answer particular questions about it. So this is a problem-based case scenario. This is classic medical teaching, great way to teach medicine. And then what does he do next? He wants them to answer specific questions based on the scenario he's given. So when we're teaching, we have to have clear aims and goals in mind. What is it we want the learners to grasp? So we set our problem-based scenario and then ask the questions in a way that's designed to bring out the particular issues that we're trying to get across. This is a very effective teaching method, as we see here from this example. And how does he end the teaching session? Well, he he challenges the learner to apply the things that he's learnt. So it's no good just getting the right answers. The question is, are you actually going to go and do it? So he leaves them with a challenge to go and do the things that they have correctly identified as what is the right thing to do. So we should always try and leave our learners with some practical application, give them something concrete to do, challenge them to go away and do it. So I'd suggest that in this parable we see two vital and key principles of good teaching, good medical teaching. It's centered on the learner and on the learner's needs. So we need to begin with where the learners are and move them on. So we have to know where they are, be responsive to their questions, and move them on appropriately. It's no good just sticking to some kind of objective curriculum or list of facts if it doesn't relate to where the learners are and to their current understanding and needs. And then it's based on a real problem. It's not some abstract list of facts. It's actually couched in such a way that it's a description of the kinds of realities that the learners are going to be dealing with. The story Jesus told was one which was based on things that actually happened. Medicine is full of patient stories, so it's easy to take a problem and teach from it because all the time the problems are there. So a problem-based approach has been shown to engage learners much more effectively than simply trying to teach them isolated facts. So, for example, if you're going to teach about diabetes, you don't just list signs, symptoms, investigations, treatment, things like that. You take patients, real patient stories, and use them to illustrate the points that you want to make. So using real cases and examples as a basis for any factual input. And there is an increasing amount of evidence that using these techniques in teaching medicine is very effective. There's a list of references, mostly from the 1990s, on this slide, which you can look at if you want to. But they're all making the point that a learner-centered, problem-based approach is an effective teaching method. So what I'd like you to do now is to think of something that either you do teach currently or that you may have to teach at some point in the future, and try to construct a lesson plan that is centered on the learners and that is using a problem-based, maybe case-based approach. And work on that individually for a few moments, make your plan, write some notes about it, and then after 5 to 10 minutes of that, you can share your plan with somebody else and just see what sort of ideas you've come up with for using a learner-centered, problem-based approach to teach a medical topic. So start with it individually, make some notes, then 5 to 10 minutes in, start to share with your neighbour and compare ideas. So we want to give you an opportunity now to share the ideas that you've been making notes on and that you've discussed together. So you may want to pause the DVD while you share those within the group, and we'll hear from each other what good ideas we've come up with. Right, so moving on, I'd like now to review with you the teaching methods that we've used in this workshop and get you to think about how I've actually taught this session. So if we ask, first of all, what learner-centered methods have I tried to use in this workshop? Well, I began with trying to check your prior understanding, what you already knew about the teaching methods of Jesus. Then I affirmed the responses that had been given and went through some other ones with you. Then I gave you a case study. You were to look at the parable of the Good Samaritan and answer specific questions on it, designed to bring out the teaching methods that Jesus was using. Then you were challenged to think of your own practical application for those things that you had just learned, how you would teach something that you have to teach using those methods. And then we went into this structured reflection time. That isn't actually included in the parable, but you can be sure that that teacher of the law who'd come with that question went away to think about it, because he'd been challenged. He'd had his whole understanding of things turned upside down. So he would have gone away to think about what he'd learned. And reflection as part of learning is important. We need to give opportunity and construct situations that enable our learners to reflect, so that it helps the learning to actually be deepened within them. So we're really coming to the end here now, and coming back to the question, what sort of a teacher was Jesus? Well, do we want to be able to teach like that? The challenge that I give to you as we end this seminar is, as the Master himself said, go and do likewise. Thank you very much.